Today, many argue for the acceptance of conduct that Jehovah forbids. They may even find support from a world already alienated from God. But wide acceptance in a growing community does not redefine righteousness. None of that is true righteousness. Our loving Creator sets the standard for what is right, not our feelings, not the community at large. In the world, sexual immorality is practiced without shame. Homosexuals flaunt their conduct. But Jehovah tells us that homosexual acts are unrighteous. God specifically warned the Israelites against this and other forms of immorality. Leviticus chapter 18 and verse 22 says that homosexual acts are detestable. That is why God gave them over to disgraceful sexual passion. For their females changed the natural use of themselves into one contrary to nature. Likewise also the males left the natural use of the female and became violently inflamed in their lust toward one another, males with males, working what is obscene and receiving in themselves the full penalty which was due for their error. So, Jehovah has not changed. According to the Creator, homosexual acts constitute disgraceful, obscene error. Some would disagree. As verse 28 points out, such ones do not consider it worthwhile to acknowledge God. But with what result? As it says there, a disapproved mental state, just the opposite of peace. And merely approving of unrighteous conduct displeases Jehovah. Notice how this is indicated in verse 32. Although these know full well the righteous decree of God that those practicing such things are deserving of death, they not only keep on doing them, but also approve of those practicing them. Still, we do not hate individuals who practice unrighteousness, nor do we judge them. On the contrary, we share the good news with them. We remember that we were all born with the same infirmities and have the same sinful tendencies. But we also have the same inherent spiritual need. And thus we recognize that others can have the same peace, the same privileges, and the same prospects we enjoy if they pay attention to Jehovah.
We've been watching governing body helper Budget Shatner, otherwise known as David Schafer, ranting against the LGBTQ plus community in his talk, "The Result of True Righteousness Will Be Peace." This is the final talk of the morning session of the 2022 Pursue Peace Convention. Where do I even begin with this homophobic, bigoted, small-mindedness? I do have a few notes in front of me, so I'll work through them. I found it interesting, before we even get into all of the gay bashing and bigoted narrow-mindedness, I did find it interesting when David Schafer said,
"But wide acceptance in a growing community does not redefine righteousness. None of that is true righteousness. Our loving Creator sets the standard for what is right, not our feelings, not the community at large."
So David Schafer is here making the argument, just because something is widely accepted doesn't make it acceptable. He is basically pushing back against what's called the argumentum ad populum. In other words, an appeal to the people or an appeal to consensus, which is a logical fallacy. Now, I'm not aware of people making this argument in support of the LGBTQ plus community. I'm not aware of people saying gay people should be respected because that's the view of the consensus. That's not the argument people are making, as far as I'm aware. The argument they're making is that people should be allowed to live as they choose and love as they choose. And why on earth is it anyone else's business if no one's being hurt or abused? And yet David Schafer clearly has a problem with this mentality, so he is erecting a straw man and suggesting that the LGBTQ plus community and those who support it are making this logical fallacy, this appeal to consensus. Well, I would just draw your attention to a quote from the Knowledge book, Knowledge That Leads to Everlasting Life, pages 24 and 25. Some scholars suggest that God's name may have been pronounced Yahweh, but they cannot be sure. The English pronunciation Jehovah has been in use for centuries, and its equivalent in many languages is widely accepted today. That is an argumentum ad populum. And there's also a bit of manipulation thrown in for good measure, because when they're making this argument in favor of Jehovah, they say of Yahweh, well, they can't be sure. Well, how can they be sure about Jehovah? No one can be sure how the Tetragrammaton was originally pronounced. Jehovah's Witnesses prefer Jehovah simply because Jehovah is, quote, widely accepted. And yet, according to David Schafer, we can have a different rule when it comes to his straw man interpretation of the LGBTQ plus position. Then he goes on to argue that homosexuality is detestable based on Leviticus 18 verse 22. So let's look up Leviticus 18 verse 22, because apparently we should be living by it, according to Budget Shatner there. Leviticus 18 verse 22, you must not lie down with a male in the same way that you lie down with a woman. It is a detestable act. Let's then scroll down to verse 29. If anyone does any of these detestable things, all those doing them must be cut off from among their people. And when you look at the footnote where it says cut off, says or put to death. So what are we supposed to do, David Schafer? You're telling us that according to this Bible verse, we should view homosexual people as detestable, but the same Bible verse doesn't just say that. It also says that we're supposed to execute people who are gay. So is executing gay people something that we should be doing as well? Then David Schafer doubles down on his vile homophobic rhetoric when he says,
Jehovah has not changed. According to the Creator, homosexual acts constitute disgraceful, obscene error.
yes, it's okay to be homophobic because Jehovah has not changed. When Jehovah decides on something, he never changes his mind. Apart from that time in Jericho. Am I the only one who's remembering David Splain's talk at the 151st Gilead graduation, which has only just gone up on the website, thumbnail to the relevant sushi here, if Tibor is gracious? David Splain devotes an entire chunk of his talk to making the argument that just because Jehovah comes up with a rule doesn't mean he can't make exceptions. This is an organization that simply cannot help talking out of both sides of its mouth. When it suits them to lecture about humility, apparently Jehovah is all flexible and merciful and not rigid. But then just a few videos later, Jehovah is rigid when it comes to how people love each other and whether people can have love for and express love for people of the same gender. Shatner then goes on to inform us, Schafer then goes on to inform us that gay people have a disapproved mental state.
Some would disagree. As verse 28 points out, such ones do not consider it worthwhile to acknowledge God. But with what result? As it says there, a disapproved mental state, just the opposite of peace.
So if you're gay, or if you support gay people or the LGBTQ plus community, it's not just that you're wrong. It's not just that your opinion is incorrect. According to David Schafer, there's something wrong with your brain. You have a disapproved mental state. This reminds me of the whole furore back in 2011 when The Independent covered the fact that apostates were being labelled as mentally diseased in the organisation's literature. They love to do this, don't they? It's classic narcissistic gaslighting. It's not just, we have this position and we respect that everyone gets to have their opinion, but this is the position we hold. It's everyone who disagrees with us has something wrong in their noggin. They're a bit crazy. That's gaslighting. That's making people question their judgment and sanity, and doing so as a means of manipulation. So thank you, David Schafer, for just putting your cards on the table and showing what a slimy snake oil salesman you really are becoming, or have become, because let's face it, he's been like this for quite a while now. And finally, the last thing of many things in this segment that I wanted to draw your attention to was that part where he says,
"We do not hate individuals who practice unrighteousness, nor do we judge them. On the contrary, we share the good news with them. We remember that we were all born with the same infirmities and have the same sinful tendencies."
We were all born with the same infirmities, and we have the same sinful tendencies. It's an infirmity now. It's an illness to be gay. You know, imagine how you must feel watching this talk as a young gay or lesbian or bisexual Jehovah's Witness. As I've said before, with your mum and dad either side of you. Imagine being in the living room with this vile speech on the flat screen in front of you, and your family around you, and being told not just that your feelings are detestable and obscene and disgraceful, not just that you have a disapproved mental state, but that you have an infirmity. There is something wrong with you, with who you are, and you need to heal yourself of this infirmity. I really, really do sympathize. I'm glad that of all of the negative experiences I personally had growing up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, this wasn't an issue for me. I can only imagine how tortured people must feel when they have to walk this tightrope of believing and following this religion, while at the same time knowing how they feel, because Jehovah, in all of his wisdom and mercy, has created gay people and then made it a law that they shouldn't be gay.